Hello, lovely people. It is great to gather around God's Word, and we are trekking through the book of Acts, and today's passage is Acts 17:16 to 28. Now, in recent chapters, we've seen Paul and Silas in prison and then travelling to Thessalonica and then Berea. As they taught wherever they could, they were teaching in the synagogues, and they were all about proving and arguing that Jesus was the Messiah. That they knew who God was and they wanted to convince others that Jesus was God. Many were saved, we read, but also many disputed their teaching and they had a hard time. And I love how focused they were. It really challenges and inspires me how focused they were to what God had called them to, that stopping sharing about Jesus wasn't an option. But what Jesus had done for them had changed who they were. You know, being shunned and despised was just part of the reality of following the way of Christ. There was a joy in it. And when I think about why this really strikes me, it is because it was in their identity. It wasn't something that they chose, I don't think, that often. It was just who they were. You know, followers of Jesus do as he does. And for me, when I read about the life of Paul and Silas, they've really clearly left the comforts of this world and they're now all about the Father's business. And I pray for myself, Lord, help me be more about your business. Help us today. You know, so much comes back to identity, doesn't it? How we see ourselves, who we believe God has called us to be, can change how we live. So Lord, renew in us that identity, how you see us, let us see ourselves. Today's passage is, we pick up Paul's journey now in Athens and waiting here for his friends. He comes, the first thing we learn is he comes into Athens, and we read he was deeply distressed to see the city full of idols. So out of that calling, out of that identity, Paul speaks and he looks to speak the truth. You know, he argued with them in the synagogues, in the marketplace, that they could know God, that they shouldn't settle for worshipping an unknown God. Indeed, it says, there's a transcription on a monument that says, to an unknown God. How can someone worship to an unknown God? I find it really fascinating. But I really find interesting his evangelism technique. You know, we often don't have these mass confrontations that we see in the book of Acts. Someone speaking to this large crowd of unsaved people who are gathered around, listening in and hearing the gospel. But back then the culture was very different. In Greek culture and education, rhetoric skills, this ability to speak and persuade and argue and reason, they were highly regarded and actually taught in education, rhetoric skills, rhetoric classes. You know, what you knew and how you could reason were part of daily life. And it was also common for teachers, for rabbis, for philosophers to come and share their teaching and for people to come and sit under them and to listen in public. So it was quite a different culture for us to think, okay, that really wasn't that unusual for them. But the main point, the main thought from today is what Paul says in front of the high courts at the Areopagus. In fact, it's a place that you can Google it, it's still standing, or if you've been, you can still see this place standing in Athens. It's where the high court was, and he was taken there to argue, and here he preached about Jesus in front of many people, and he uses one of their own poets. And this is a verse that has really inspired me. It's really influenced my witness, my way of thinking about how we are to relate to people and show them God. It's a great example of contextual evangelism, using the values and idols and things of the time to engage and relate to people. And then, once we've engaged them with something that they're passionate about, then to show them how Christ is passionate about that and about them as well, how Christ is found in those things. Paul was using these poets' words to persuade them about God. And it acknowledges, what I love it is it acknowledges that God is at work around us. God is already at work in and around us, and our job is to help others find him, to reveal the God who is the creator, the God who loves us and loves everyone, that God is in their midst, that he's come down, he's present. So I wonder today what this might look like for us, rather than thinking about our differences with those who might have different opinions. Look for commonalities, look what you have in common, and how we can show others God in their worlds, in their contexts. And it might help by asking, what are the things that people value, where you live, where you work, where you play, where you spend your time? What are the things in their culture that they really prize? Maybe their idols even. Then how might Jesus relate to them? How does God's plan involve or relate to that thing? And one story, just very quickly, one example is that I thought was, I've got a neighbour, he's a gardener, he loves gardening, but he's not been able to get out to his garden for last year because he had COVID last Easter. And I said to him over summer, can I help you do some gardening? And probably the next step for me would be, if he allows me to help him garden this spring, would be for me to express my thought that God is a God who is in nature, that I find God in nature, that when I am out walking or when I do my own gardening, I can encounter God. Just sow a seed, and so that when he is able to garden by himself, maybe that seed will grow and he'll think about God, and maybe he will encounter God through gardening himself. So there's many ways we can follow in Paul's example here of using the culture to share the gospel and to reveal the God who is knowable and who is in and around all of us. Bless you. Have a good day.